I was watching a video the other day of a 9-year-old boy who was at a strip club, who was smacking the ass of a stripper.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
And I'm like,
yep.
Is that what we want to do, black people? Is that what we want to do?
Yeah.
And all everyone was around him like, hey! And I was like, okay, yeah, there's a lot to do. Unfortunately, we live in a time where, as a black person, I can say that a lot of the things that a lot of black people tie themselves to is detrimental to black people in general. And so, yeah, like I've been speaking about these things for years, right? And it is a thing of, like I said, we don't know how powerful these things are, right? And the things that are being shown through these screens, right? Generally to black people, I was watching a video the other day of a 9-year-old boy who was at a strip club, who was smacking the ass of a stripper.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
And I'm like,
yep.
Is that what we want to do, black people? Is that what we want to do?
Yeah.
And all everyone was around him like, hey! And I was like, okay, yeah, there's a lot to do. And so, yeah, I do find myself in a little bit of an outside position because if I speak on that and say that is negative, what is deemed as being quote unquote black is a lot of negativity. And so people will try and say, oh, he's a coon, he's a Uncle Tom. And I'm like, well, I don't think I am. I'm just asking for you to be better than what you are. Yeah. And I'm saying I'm black too. Could you please represent me in a better light? Could you please represent us in a better light? No, you're a coon. Okay.
Do you think a lot of this sort of culture comes from America?
Yes.
And how much?
We spoke about that last time, didn't we?
Did, because it was obvious to me at the time. Yeah. And I was just, like in the interceding years, is it getting better or worse?
So this is what's the thing. I've studied African history, right? And when I look at the history of Africa and I look at America, unfortunately, I've said this before, unfortunately, the African was made into a new African with colonization and slavery. And so what is now exported is a new subculture of what it means to be black. And it's like,
because
that's not what we came from.
You speak you can speak to a lot of people from Africa who are not not a product of it. And they're just, they're really conservative and patriarchal.
100%.
Yeah. And so
100%.
And it seems to be sort of the American culture.
Americans
that is not, it's a lot more feminized.
Americans have been very they've been able to export their culture very well. Yeah. And that's just basically what happened. They've been able to use their quote unquote media machine to export their culture.
Because when you were saying about earlier about how, like, okay, so if Europeans make Jesus white in their own image, which of course they do, in the same way that blacks would make Jesus black in their own image. Well, if you're the place of imperium, if you're the place of power, and that gets spread across the world, then if it's black culture in America that's getting spread across the world, that's not good for anyone, right?
Yeah, so it's a very great analogy as well, and the way in which you linked it, because what it means to be black is to export this
ghetto culture,
whatever, and then what it is to be God is to export that. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're both using mediums to export what they think is
And so it's the same process, just in different eras.
In different ways. In different areas.
Equipment.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Windpill Seeker says the problem in Africa is the lack of individual land and property rights. Collectivism, be it Marxist, theocratic, monarchic, allows local leaders to confiscate and own all resources and sell out. Socialism is a massive problem in Africa, obviously. Any questions on that?
I've said, what is the ideal system then? Because I'm not saying that capitalism, socialism, or communism
they've all got problems.
Right. So I'm saying what is the best system?
I'm not sure there is a single best system.
Single one.
But there's definitely bad ones. And I think that socialism is definitely one of the bad ones because it allows people to commit theft and pretend they're being good, frankly.
What, like capitalism?
No. I'm not a capitalist.
No, I'm just saying. I'm not saying like people commit theft under capitalism and they're being good.
Capitalism at least ostensibly criminalizes theft, whereas socialism is predicated on theft. So the socialists would say, no, we need to take their land and redistribute it. Okay, fair enough. Like, I understand that thing. But the capitalists will at least say, well, no, you've got an entitlement to the things you own, right? Now, I'm not saying there isn't exploitation and all these other things, but socialism, the ruling principle of it is theft, whereas the ruling principle of capitalism is trade, theoretically.
So, there's a book.
Oh, yes.
And there's a book called How the West Underdeveloped Africa, or How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, right? And if you read that book, Albert Butler, I believe it was, that wrote it, you will see that it's very interesting. What is called theft, right? Because like you spoke about, Jack Chirac said, we plundered them for, that's theft.
Sure.
But you now look like the arbiter of morals, you had the moral high ground.
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, like, imperialism isn't capitalism, right?
True.
Like, I'm not,
but they're now linked, though.
Sure, they certainly were, and certainly because of Britain towards the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries. But the problem is you've got like historical events that are happening concurrently that have layers and beginnings and ends that overlap with one another, right? So, for example, if we look at, say, 20th century capitalism, it's very, very hard on property rights, right? So it's very, very, because that's the sort of genuine spirit of capitalism. But if you have a sort of legacy imperial system where people are starting to understand that free trade can produce massive wealth, well, you will get exploitation in that system. But the imperialism is over now because that was deemed to be immoral, rightly so. But capitalism itself is in the ownership and distribution of goods and property. That's not immoral.
However,
so it persists.
No, the thing is, I actually agree with you.
Yeah.
However, to get to that point,
I'm not saying injustices weren't.
You had to be unjust,
and that's what the validation for socialism is. Because they'll say, "Well, hang on a second. If a series of unjust events led us to this point, then we are justified in doing something unjust in return, right? We get to take it and take it back." And the thing is, there's strength to that argument. There is genuine strength to that argument. But the problem is, once you're in the mindset of saying, well, we're just going to take these things and that's how it works, well, that attracts really bad people. Like, that attracts really corrupt people. And so
then, because this, I don't disagree with you, right? What I'm saying is, people never forget. This is the problem that I think we have. People don't forget. If the Chinese invade tomorrow, Great Britain, right? And 5 centuries go by, right? But the English people or the people of the UK, right, have children, generations, blah, blah, blah. They're never going to forget that the Chinese invaded.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And so they're always going to have some kind of thing against Chinese rule.
Absolutely.
And Chinese imperialism. And so, and so if Chinese now are trying to show people, hey, listen, we're the moral people, they're going to be like, you didn't get it like that.
Yeah. No.
Do you know what I'm saying? People never forget.
And that's a totally fair critique. That's the thing. It is a fair critique. And it's one that the modern liberal doesn't understand, because the modern liberal thinks that history begins now. They think we're just... Exactly. And so they can't recognize that groups of people carry baggage, I guess you call it. Yes. Like, they carry their luggage with them, right? Yes. And so, like, this thing, like, I had a debate with Narinder Kaur, and she's a Sikh woman from India. Well, not her, she's not from India, but her parents are from India. And she was saying, well, look, you did this to us. And I'm like, on a continuum of being British, yes, you can say that. But the modern liberal says, well, I was never there, so I didn't do it. So it's not my responsibility. But that doesn't mean that she then puts the baggage down and then just carries on. And so the question of multiculturalism becomes a really complex one and says, okay, well, why would you bring in a bunch of people who have got all this baggage against you into your country? They should be in their country, right? And that seems to be the only logical way of resolving the problem.
Do you know what's so funny? I was actually having this conversation this morning with somebody. I said, because they were like, all right, so what's the answer to the question? I was like, everyone go back to where they came from.
Well, what's the other answer? And I'm not demanding
everyone go back to where they came from. It's not because I don't advocate violence, so it's a non-violent way of doing it.
Absolutely.
Everyone go back to where they came from. However, sorry to cut that. However, there are some people that have heavy interests in other countries, who wouldn't want to essentially go back to where they came from. And that's across the board, white, black, whoever.